And now, as ever, to the papers. The Brexit Party under Nigel Farage is going click, click, click up in the polls all the time, and that really provides the backdrop for today's political news. The Sunday Times sums it up like this: populist surge sinks Tories and squeezes Labour. The Observer is looking at the Labour Party side. They say Labour MPs fear their Brexit line will hand votes to the Lib Dems, and I'll be talking to Jeremy Corbyn about that very shortly. There's the Sunday Express. They've got a big poll, and they again summarise it by saying that Britain says, let Nigel Farage lead the Brexit talks if he wins these European elections. And it also shows a really large percentage of people now want a no-deal Brexit. And then there are lots of polls, of course, that's just one. And then the Sunday Telegraph there has a story about Theresa May and the British veterans from Northern Ireland alleging that she has betrayed them. And again, we will be talking about all of that. Now, if you're wondering why we look a little bit different today, it's because our usual studio is being kitted out in grand, spiffy style for the big EU election results programme next Sunday. With me to review the papers are Sarah Vine, Stacey Dooley and Ella Whelan. Sarah, let's start with you and the politics.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about all of today's papers is that the only thing that stands out really is Farage and how well he's doing. And it's interesting, you know, we've got John Major in the Times talking about how we need to regain the modern middle ground of politics, but the voters are cleaving towards they're becoming more and more polarised. I mean, this poll here says 63% would just like to leave without a deal. I think that's probably to do with Brexit fatigue. I think people are just like, oh, just
get
do
rid of
it now.
Take it away.
Just please make it stop. So I think there's an element of that going on. But I think Farage himself is fascinating because he just has one message. He's very clear and simple and easy to understand. And he's a little... I mean, what we must remember is that this polarisation thing is not just us in the UK. You know, in Italy, we've got Salvini somewhere who's incredibly sort of right wing, also doing very, very well. The Spanish have just very narrowly avoided having quite a right wing government. So it's interesting. This is a massive trend, and of course we've got Trump coming over next week or the week after, just to remind us of what polarised politics looks like.
That guy in Italy was saying, wasn't he, I quite fancy working with Nigel Farage,
yes.
You know?
Nigel's been saying he's learnt a lot from Salvini as well, yeah.
And I think it's a relative shame that the right has managed to capitalise the idea of populism, and the two kind of get used interchangeably, populism, populists and right-wingers. And actually, it's, you know, there's scope for something very exciting happening in politics at the moment, where you've got mass engagement with politics, whether it be Brexit, I mean, across Europe, people wanting change. Something in me says we shouldn't let people like Farage be able to claim this. There should be something else on offer.
What's also interesting is the way that these characters cut through, and the way they do it is that they don't use... I mean, I think this is something that the Tories have a problem with particularly, which is that their operations sort of system is just very old-fashioned. You know, Farage and Salvini, they talk directly to people, and we live in this sort of social media age.
Yeah.
So the idea that you're still operating along these very old-fashioned party lines where it's a whole sort of, you know, it feels fusty, and that's why people perhaps aren't so engaged.
Stacey, because again, thinking of Farage, one of the things he's got, when he says something, he says what he wants to say, whereas lots of politicians are looking over their shoulders, wondering about their colleagues, wondering about the party line.
That's exactly why people find him so attractive. Yeah, he's very concise, he's very clear, he's very transparent. You know, whether you agree with him or fundamentally disagree, you know where he stands.
But I think we'd be wrong to suggest that this was just a kind of case of communication or something as shallow as personality. It's actually the fact that the key thing is his message, which is democracy and Brexit, which is the thing that has interested people. I think in another situation in which we had someone else putting forward this message, it would be just as popular. There are left-wing candidates within the Brexit Party.
I do think personality, though, is, going back to what you said, but personality in politics is very important. Look at how well Boris is polling. Yeah. And he is a huge personality. People like strong characters. You know, they really do.
They like people that they think they can trust, that the person, you know, what they're saying, they believe in what they're saying.
Yeah. Do you think the outcome of this is therefore that the Conservative Party, looking at what's happening in the country, are likely to go for a strong Brexiteer as their next leader? No names, no facts.
I think the concern in if you had been saying of a leadership contest 6 months ago, I think the big issue would have been who can deliver a decent Brexit. I think now it's more who can win a general election, because it feels like that's where that's the biggest danger. So obviously, the parliamentary party need to make those considerations. They need to balance choosing someone who is popular in the wider country and with with ordinary people, but someone who can also unite the party. That's the most important thing, because at the moment we're just it's just so split.
Ella, I think you're going to vote for the Brexit Party, you've said.
I am.
Despite your reservations about Nigel Farage. That will upset the gentleman who's writing a long column in the Sunday Times.
Here is a fantastic reason
Michael Heseltine.
Why I am voting for the Brexit Party, because as Michael Heseltine wrote, he says that Brexit seeps its poison into every family, age group, class and region. I mean, it's that kind of disdain for democracy that I think is pushing people towards the Brexit Party, which has a very clear message on democracy. I mean, Heseltine's an arch Remainer, and in this article he's talking about the fact that he's going to rebel. He's not going to vote for the Tories, he's going to vote for Bill Newton-Dunn, his local Liberal Democrat candidate, because he hates Brexit so viciously and because he's so set against it. I think it's a wonderful example of the kind of arrogance among certain politicians, that they think that they're, in relation to the referendum, they just don't see it as an issue that they have to listen to, and that's why people want change.
What we shouldn't do is forget that there is an agenda in Westminster as well to try and resolve this. Theresa May is making her big, bold new offer in the papers today, and this is to bring back the withdrawal bill and to try to persuade MPs yet again to back it.
Fourth time lucky, Andrew.
A teeny little column for something that's billed as so big and so bold. I'm sure she'll be disappointed with that. But there is really nothing new going on here. I mean, as far as we know, that any kind of change in relation to the withdrawal bill is going to be slight. And there's a really great point that she makes in it. I don't think she realises what she's saying. She says, while the deal MPs are to vote on will be different, the dynamics of their decision will remain the same. The dynamics of the House of Commons has not changed. And whether or not she tinkers a bit with the deal, I think the problem is that our politicians do not want to deliver on Brexit until a Prime Minister comes to terms with that and takes a bold step forward, which would be ensuring, making sure that no deal happened, making sure that Brexit happened. It's all for the birds.
I think as well, sorry to interrupt. I think everyone's assuming, October the 31st is such a long way away. It isn't. No. Like, before you know it, we'll be there.
Don't waste this time, Tusk told the British. We seem to be doing our best to do that. Now, you've chosen a story from the Sunday Times there, Stacey, which could have made a sort of Stacey Dooley documentary if you've got your hands on the video that they've got.
Well, I wonder if that's why I was so interested in this story. I've spent a lot of time in Iraq, in Mosul, and essentially it's saying there's this one phone, 4 British lads, 4 British jihadists, and they were just sharing this phone. And I've met lots of people when I've been in the Middle East, and that's what they tend to do. So they'll hold on to a phone, have their own SIM, and then a couple of weeks later it's off to someone else. But I think what it does is it illustrates very clearly that you've got these 4 young, sort of disillusioned boys who are sort of looking at this as a bit of a journey, a bit of, this is so exciting.
They're sort of playing with their guns, look at my big gun.
Exactly.
Playing with their Arabicas too.
Well, that's it, and they're sort of trying to kind of slip in sort of an Arabic word here and there, but they're so British and they sound, there's such thick London accents. I think it's just it's
the journey from them sort of seeing it as a sort of almost like a game, a sort of just a sort of way of posturing, and they think they're rebelling, and then it deteriorating into really tragedy.
So, Stacey, the journey out is really exciting, but there's no way home. That's the point.
Well, that's what becomes increasingly clear, and you see some of the pictures. I don't know whether or not you can see these.
And it sort of gets nasty and real, doesn't it?
Yeah, someone likens it to sort of a lad's holiday in Ayia Napa or Magaluf, and then you sort of, the camera turns and you can see the AKs lines up.
And you can see the naivety of them as well, which I think is, you see that sort of human side of them.
And the 4 here, I mean, we know this guy is dead, this guy blew himself up, it was a car suicide bombing in Iraq, dead. 20 dead. This one is the only one that they don't know what's happened to, but it's painful.
What they did was, of course, even more painful as well.
Of course, no,
let's turn to the other huge story of the day that we haven't. Eurovision on cue. We weren't going to ignore it. Honest.
I watched it all. I always watch it. I love Eurovision.
Didn't. You watched the whole thing?
Yeah, I watched it. I do.
Hours,
I love it. I just can't. I don't know what's wrong with me. It's just a thing. I always have to watch it.
I said to Sarah, I watched the beginning and then I fell asleep. I felt like I'd been asleep for about 5 hours, and then I woke up, it was still going.
It was the Australian lady on the stick that I just couldn't. I just loved her. She was brilliant.
Explain to me how
no one knows why
the heck
was
Australia is in the Eurovision. We don't know.
I think it's just because Australians clearly love a party, and this was obviously a massive party.
It's a very camp party.
It's a
Are we
very
saying
camp
that Australia
party.
is now officially camp enough to be in Eurovision?
Yes, I think parts of Australia. Yes, perhaps, but they didn't win. Some Norwegian man won, I think, didn't he? And we, of course, came last, which is very, very good because we must always come last. Otherwise, we'll have to host it, which we really don't want to do.
The point of Eurovision is that our European brothers and sisters make plonkers of themselves at great length, and then we come last.
Exactly.
That's the essence of it.
The most exciting thing was Madonna singing so spectacularly out of tune. I was actually quite worried for her.
You said that she had that. I'm sorry.
She had
that patch on. You said she had conjunctivitis.
I thought she might have conjunctivitis.
It wasn't a style statement.
Apparently, it's her new persona. Only has one eye.
Okay, last story before we leave. A serious story. Theresa May and the British veterans from Northern Ireland. This is becoming a really, really big, hot and angry story around the country.
Exactly right. So you touched on it earlier, but I suppose what's angered some people, who's been really vocal, the Tory MP Mercer, and they're saying it's hypocrisy.
Ex-soldier
you know,
himself.
she's saying something sort of in public and then something entirely different privately.
And so to explain to people, this is about how and when British troops in Northern Ireland who were there during the so-called Troubles are prosecuted for instance, murder. And Theresa May is saying in the private letter they should not be given special treatment.
Well, that's it. It says it states that Mrs May wanted action to be taken against any person who was operating outside of the parameters of the law. So whether they were soldiers or they belonged to kind of Republican military groups.
You don't have to be a massive fan of the British Army or the British state, as I am not, to know that there's something wrong going on here. Because I think it's one of the interesting that hasn't really been delved into is the idea that it's making a differentiation between the illegal things that soldiers did and then somehow saying that the things that the British state rubber stamped was morally correct. I mean, it was a war, it was a bloody war, it was something that happened quite a significant time ago. Even those of us who still wish that Ireland had freedom, of which I am one of them, don't think that this is the right way to go down.
A really bloody, complicated story to end on. Thanks all very much for now.